Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Hebert, Director of Communications here at SAANYS, and I welcome you to a very special edition of SAANYS Connect. This edition will feature school leaders from around the world who have already begun opening their schools, learning some valuable lessons in the process that they will share with us as we draw closer to our own school openings. We have pre-recorded 3 interviews with colleagues from Australia, the Netherlands, and Ireland. We have Andrew Blair, Executive Director of Wesley College Institute in Melbourne, Australia; Georgia Heffernan, Deputy Principal at Catholic Ladies College in Eltham, Australia; Paul Byrne, Deputy Director of the National Association of Principals and Deputy Principals in Ireland; and Petra van Haren, President of AVS, the Dutch Schoolhead Association for Primary and Secondary School Leaders in the Netherlands. As I mentioned, the interviews you will be seeing were pre-recorded, and therefore, of course, this episode does not lend itself to the interactive format that you have experienced in previous SAANYS Connects. However, you are invited to share in the chat room throughout the presentation, which I will be monitoring along with my SAANYS colleague, Karen Bronson. Before we begin, we'll hear a brief word from our sponsor, The Leader in Me.
Muriel Summers is principal of the North Carolina school that first implemented Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in a School Environment.
13 years ago, when we were one of the lowest performing schools in our district and in our state, we looked to business models to help us transform our school. And we looked at Dr. Covey's work in transforming the culture of the school, where there was a common language, there was an operating system for how we would work together as educators to make a difference for our children. And then we looked at the business model of quality improvement and looked at Deming's work, Edward Deming's work. So we really went to great businesses to learn from them what makes a great organization, and we tried to align that with what we do in schools, and that became our foundation. As a result of bringing people to the table and saying we need help, we were able to bring some of the best minds in our community. And we asked the question, if you could create your ideal school, what would it look like, sound like, and feel like? And we got that feedback from our community, and then we started to build a model.
I'm at a school called Wesley College. Wesley is a large multi-campus, co-educational, independent or private school that has been around for about 165 years. It has 3,500 students. We have about 1,200 staff.
The deputy principal at a independent Catholic girls' school, which was founded in the early 1900s, 1902, by the Sisters of Charity, Irish friends and sisters, and was established out in Eltham, which is about 35 kilometres from the heart of the city of Melbourne, out in the leafy suburbs. And we have about 800 girls and about 80 staff. And the girls are from year 7 to 12, so from 12 years old through to 17, 18.
So maybe you can start by telling us where you are now in your reopening process, where you have come since reopening and what's going on right now.
Right now, we're scrambling around the idea of our staff delivering both in a face-to-face setting as well as remotely. If our staff are teachers of years 10, 11 and 12, they will deliver remotely to students if they teach in other year levels on campus. We still have some issues with our international students, many of whom returned home prior to the first lockdown and have been unable to get back into Australia. So we're in a situation where There's an enormous amount of demand on our teachers to not only deliver as they would normally do in a face-to-face, but also remotely and doing that concurrently. So that's from a teaching perspective. From a student management and a parent management perspective, what our kids didn't do when they came back last time was to understand a single thing about physical distancing. They just loved seeing each other and hugged each other, and
Yes.
it was completely sort of away from the textbook, if you like. So we've now gone into a situation where we are being absolutely prescriptive about physical distancing. We're recommending kids wear masks to and from school and also at school. We are serious about the idea that we need to do our bit to avoid the transmission of this virus from our school gate. We need to manage our parents and what they do, so there's absolutely no opportunity for a parent to drop a student off and get out of their car. There is traffic management all the way through, and now, of course, every student returning to face-to-face provision in Victoria needs to be temperature checked as soon as they get on campus. So our medical centres are prepared for that, and every student is tested. If they have an elevated temperature, they will be sent home.
Thank you. So you had your students back for a period of weeks, and now you're back in a lockdown situation with all the challenges that come with that. Georgia, what would you like to add to that? Andrew also shared some things that they have learned along the way. Maybe you could do the same.
As Andrew said, the girls will not socially distant, and we have lots of mixed messages. So we have the government's advice that then comes with this disclaimer: principals will be responsible for, navigating these rules and regulations in a way that fits their context. So our school is not particularly concerned about social distancing for students. So we still gather in class groups, and we still have large assessments and so forth in open space, in our halls and things like that. Whereas the staff are very, very concerned. So we are again encouraging the use of masks, but it's, there would be 1 in 10, 1 in 20 probably that are feel as though it's necessary to wear a mask. We've learned so much, and that is good and it's great. And there's a sense of, it's 2.0. We're back on, let's just do what we did. However, our parent body in particular are far wiser this time. And so we've already had quite a lot of communication where parents are now expecting or demanding a different service for their child. And we also manage that with, what we've called synchronous and asynchronous teaching. So to enable that flexibility for students to perhaps do some work in their own time when it suited them. That, I would have to say, across the board has been the biggest feedback we've had. Students right from primary year levels have enjoyed the self-directed component to the learning. Who would have thought? Which is fabulous. And those students who thrived in that self-directed environment have really stood up in this space and said, let us do some things at our own pace. Let us engage when we feel like it. If I want to sleep in and stay up until 10 a.m. because I'd like to read my novel, then let me do that. So I think we really need to, how do we find a flexible approach and trust the students that they will engage in the learning if we make it, on their terms. And we found, and I know this is slightly to the side, but when we came back from that first lockdown, we had essentially 4 weeks with our senior students back face-to-face and 2 with our junior, and they struggled to fit back into the rules. So we had lots of our middle years girls, our the 14, 15-year-old girls going, you know what, I feel like having a break. So I think I might go for a walk around the oval. And, you know, the bells would go off and the alarm bells would go off and we'd go racing around the school looking for these missing students, you know, or I don't feel like doing this work now. It's not really suiting me. I might do this later, and I might just go and grab a coffee from the canteen. So it's been, I think, fabulous because it has really enhanced student voice, and that really excites me. But you do have to find ways of fitting this kind of idea of wanting and needing to be flexible into a very highly structured, uniform, conformist model of education that we have. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Andrew, thank you, Georgia.
Sorry, I think what I'd add is, I think last time we chatted, I mentioned that we were going through a formal evaluation of stage 1 lockdown and remote provision. And today, I'm actually today releasing to our teaching staff an analysis of the responses from 2,234 students about stage 1. And I think some of the takeaways from this analysis are really quite interesting in the sense that I think that we've got a fair amount of evidence that some of our staff, probably more than we would want, in a synchronous remote lesson tended to try and just substitute face-to-face pedagogy in a digital platform. And we had evidence of kids saying, in some instances, just being so over a teacher just talking to them for 50 minutes that they just put the teacher on mute, which I think is fabulous. So therefore, I think that what's incumbent on us, and we're moving into a process now of providing online tutorials to our teachers around the differences in delivering digitally than face-to-face, and what are some of the tricks that everybody could use in this new environment. The piece that Georgia referenced around the synchronous asynchronous is absolutely true of our kids. The more senior the kids, the higher the year level, the more they wanted independence. They felt like it suited the way they chose to learn better than a face-to-face routine environment. The younger our students, the less they wanted, massive slabs of screen time. It's interesting that what teachers have tended to do in our environment is provide students with more and more work to do in a digital environment, and kids telling us that they were absolutely being crushed by workload, which we're trying to resolve by coordinating in a far more overt way every year level, having managed workload and assessment schedules for kids in a remote environment. But I think the biggie, if I had to pick one thing, and I'd be interested in George's comment here, the big challenge that I think we've faced is remaining or continuing to have a strong connection with our kids in a well-being sense. The whole piece around the pastoral program, if you like, the checks on kids is critical in this environment, in a digital setting. But we're in this kind of strange situation of being our own worst enemy, I think. And by that I mean, we've been really careful about child safety. So we haven't allowed one-on-one sessions with teachers and kids. But we're getting evidence, particularly around our junior adolescents, that they are not prepared or they're not comfortable talking about their well-being in front of their peers. So we need to do something in this stage 2 to break that nexus. Either we revisit the one-on-one, engage in parental permission. We already have instructions in place about recording sessions and all of that kind of stuff. But I think there's evidence that we need to be better at connecting with our youngsters in this environment. There are some challenges with the technology that we've used, but you know, OneNote, for example, we're a Microsoft environment. OneNote across the world has struggled, and we found exactly the same at Wesley. So I would say that by and large, the students are telling us that there was a lot to like about remote learning. There was a sense that they could be more in control of their day, and staff were reporting to us that they struggled. They struggled with the amount of work that was required of them, particularly if they had young families themselves. And they struggled with the hours of work, many of them reporting that they were working, 12, 14 hours a day, as well as managing their own youngsters in their learning.
That's an amazing amount. I love the way that you're picking up on the evidence that you've learned.
Oh, yeah, I'm just kind of nodding away to Andrew here because it's so universal. And I think the fact that we've been through it and now we're flipped around and we're going back into it, that notion of what has and hasn't worked, it can't be just written off now as, oh, but we made it, or we made it through together. It's now, yeah, well, we learned that didn't work, so what are you going to do about it? And, teachers are still chasing their tail. They're kind of catching up with what just happened. We just kind of went through this metamorphosis, and now you want me to do what? Whereas, the young, our young people, they've kind of sat back and said, you know what, I actually like this. I like this. There are aspects of this that I'm now demanding that you keep. I want detailed lesson plans. I want longer breaks in between classes. I want shorter days. I want to wear more comfortable clothes. I want to get up later if I want. I want to be warm. When you hear them say it, you kind of think to yourself, what are we doing to these students? Yeah, I think, the notion of wellbeing, we knew that it was going to be highly important. And we have, from the very beginning, gone with the Google Suite. And we've used G Suite. So we've had Google Meets, we've had Google Classroom. And there is a lot of functionality in there for private messaging, and that the students have really found that the consistent and frequent feedback from teachers on an individual basis, which is the model we want in our classrooms, has been enabled and enhanced in this online environment. So they've said, gee, that really helped me. Now that I'm going to go back to class, what, you're going to take that away from me? So it's really challenging for teachers, and I think they are learning exponentially about ICT and how this pedagogical approach, and the girls don't like it when I do this and they do like it when I do that, and how do I learn how to use these tools? I've not used them before, and all of this going on, and then wanting, to meet the needs of the students. So we've had one-on-one right from the start, and we've recorded. And that was the way that we found that was, appropriate in terms of child safety, because it is incredibly important. Yeah, Karen, sorry.
It's just so fascinating. This is such a challenging time, but it's so deeply fascinating what we are seeing in terms of the depth of change. And I know, Andrew, when we spoke last time in June, you saw one of the primary challenges ahead in being resistance to change. And we all know what that is like in our schools, right? And this whole experience, the horse is out of the barn, okay?
Yeah.
The horse is out of the barn. Our older students in particular have really experienced what more ownership and freedom around their learning is like. And that's nothing that makes it easy to go back to business as usual. I think what's so interesting is that, you know, I wish we had more time to go into other areas such as equity and how inequity has been exposed, that's existed for such a long time. It's not new, but this experience has pulled the Band-Aid off it, right?
Yeah.
So the same is true in terms of traditional instruction, okay? School schedules, how instruction is delivered, how students are expected to demonstrate what they learn and know. The Band-Aid's off that one, okay? And those kinds of issues have existed for a long time, and there have been many good things happening to nudge change, but now with this, you know, unexpected and unintended experience, we're really seeing something different. But Andrew, back to what you said, we can't lose sight of the fact that your youngest students, those little guys, no Zoom meeting is ever going to take the place for them of being with their peers and kind of tumbling around in the playground. You know, that's kind of it. But this is a fascinating conversation because of what we are seeing in terms of the depth of change with regard to education.
So one of the kind of interesting things is that we asked our students lots of open-ended questions. Over 60% of our senior years, so 10, 11 and 12 kids, came back with a view that over 60% said that they would like to have 1 day a week of asynchronous learning. Yeah. Now, that was unexpected, I must say. I didn't quite expect that level. Play that off against the fact that this is anecdotal, but from feedback from teachers, I sensed that teachers in the first round of remote provision saw this as being a temporary inconvenience. That it'd be okay after a while because we'd be back to normal.
Yeah.
Well, whilst that kind of view has been at least anecdotally expressed, as you put it, Karen, the horse has bolted. The world has changed, and our teachers are going to have to make some serious adjustments to their practice in order to maintain their relevance and connection to the kids who are in front of them, whether that's on a screen or in a classroom. But our challenge as school leaders is to do that in a way that is supportive, developmental and exciting for teachers, rather than seeing it as an imposition of something that, some of them still think that face-to-face is by far and away the most superior delivery mode, because it says to me that that's more about them thinking about themselves as teachers rather than connecting to the learner.
If we could turn it back to Cindy. I don't know how we're doing on time. Cindy?
Yeah, this is just maybe just how do you determine though whether it's face-to-face or remote, what is actually being taught? Who decides whether there's more emphasis on an English versus a math versus a science, or are you trying to fit it all in as you would have a year and a half ago?
Well, because we teach the International Baccalaureate and the Victorian Certificate of Education in our senior years, those curriculums are prescribed, and the the balance of time between subjects is prescribed. All of that continues.
And Georgia, you're going to try to fit it all into? I mean, standards are the standards, the coursework is the coursework, and somehow we're just going to do.
Essentially, yes. However, we have, as Andrew sort of said, we've reduced the workload. So, well, we're trying to appeal to the teachers, please reduce the workload, particularly around assessment, formal assessment. So we've taken out all of our exams in the middle of the year. We've reduced the assessments we would normally report on to parents. And we're trying really desperately to get teachers to reduce homework. So reducing the content, reducing the amount, but not reducing the contact, if that makes sense. So we're still having the equality in terms of the contact. That is theoretical because, you still get lots of feedback that teachers say they're working too hard, and we're trying to say that's because you're generating too much work and that work just comes back to you. So maybe if you let some of that stuff go, you would reduce your own workload. And same with the homework, don't set homework for the girls that already, they're capable of engaging in the work that they want to do and need to do. They don't need busy work. So, as Karen said, we've just gone too far down the tunnel now to turn around and come back, which is, I think, so exciting. But the students will, they'll vote with their feet. And if schools can't morph into this next stage, and as Andrew said, find ways of doing that is supportive of teachers, I think we'll find kind of a mass exodus at some point of teachers from the system, which could be a good thing, as well as students who will look for alternatives. And perhaps, we've got a lot of students already for health reasons that have a hybrid model, and they might do 2 days on campus and the rest through a virtual school. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that as well.
What advice would you give a principal right now? What one takeaway?
I think the most important thing for a school principal to do right now is to be clear, concise, and be focused on the well-being, the health and well-being of school communities, and not be compromised in that at all. So be clear, this is unprecedented. Be clear, this is about protecting people's lives. And unless you are absolutely unequivocal about that, things, in my view, have a risk of going horribly wrong.
I feel for principals. I think it's a really, really difficult time for them to manage their own well-being as well. And I hope that we don't see that fall out in the future as well, where people find that job untenable in terms of going through these significant events. But yeah.
I think one of the things that perhaps I should mention is, whilst we've completed this early round of evaluation of perception and opinion from teachers and students about phase one, what we're also doing is a piece of work about what are the implications about what we've learned in terms of what are the organisational challenges for Wesley, what are the curriculum implications, what are the implications for even things like professional learning for our staff, what are the implications for public programs, et cetera. So I've pulled a team together who are working on what we're terming gentle provocations for our future as a result of what we've seen and learnt. So again, I think that will be challenging for many people because what this does for us is a simple thing like you know, what are the opportunities for us to deliver our curriculum from one campus to multiple campuses, or to students all over Australia or over the world? These opportunities are absolutely available to us. The question is, and I think COVID has asked this of every school, what kind of school and what kind of place, what kind of provision do you want to see for yourselves in the future? Because the fundamentals have changed. So
Have they
I think,
ever?
like many schools, we're going through this, and I think it'll be absolutely fascinating to live through what will be a rapidly changing educational landscape.
My name is Petra van Haren. I am the chair of the AVS, which is the Dutch School Head Association for Primary and Secondary Education. I have a master title in Management of Education and a lifelong experience in education, both as a professional and a mother.
So when did schools shut down in the Netherlands, and how did things progress over there for you? A little timeline to get us started.
Yeah. In the system, we have a commission, which is called the RIVM. And this is a commission of scientists who are advisory board for our government. And there was a close communication, of course, from this advising group to the government, how to act in society and in schools. And the first step was to behave with distance and to cough in your arm and to be careful. But soon after, there was the advice for a total lockdown. And of course, with the schools, we were already in this process because, like you had New York, we had the south of the Netherlands, where was a real explosion of the COVID-19. And there were already schools closing because there were a lot of children and a lot of teachers at home. But about the 15th of March, we had a national lockdown, including the schools. And from there, day to day, we had, of course, the progress of what to do. And then it was very interesting because within 2 days, all the school heads and their teams made the transition from normal education to distant education. And in the Netherlands, we have a very high internet connection. A lot of children have devices at home. So it was pretty easy to get them connected. There was a smaller group which was not having devices, which did not understand the lockdown because of the social background or sometimes the immigrant background. So in the beginning, there were a number of kids, a reasonable number, 5,000 for the Dutch understanding is a big group, was lost, was missing. But teachers went out on their bikes, by car, with books, with everything needed to get connection to these children. And after a few weeks, we saw it shrinking, that only 500 children were like missing children. And most of them were children of European immigrants, which went home and took their children, but forget to register in schools. So we were pretty fast able first to connect with children. And we used a lot of instruments like Google Hangout or Microsoft Teams or Zoom or a lot of WebEx, lot of instruments. But most important is that we were able very fast to connect with the children and also to catch up with education. And in the first week, mainly, we started to do some rehearsal on the already known curricula parts. But soon we understood that it would be a longer period. So teachers made also a quick transition, because before this time there was some part of electronical or distant education. And a lot of teachers did not really like the idea, because physical teaching and the pedagogical dimension of being in touch with children physically was very important. But they managed, also the teachers who were not so equipped to do this, within 1 week to make the transition into this virtual way of education and connecting by the internet. And I think we were pretty much successful in getting education on a distance running up very quickly.
So now we're looking at reopening. What is happening there as far as reopening? Do you anticipate reopening on schedule? And what is your schedule, your school calendar?
Well, first, it's important because this period is for us the period that children go to the other class, or they do the exam, or they did have the final tests. For primary education, we decided not to take the final test and to depend completely on the advice of the school. And in secondary education, we did not do the end exam in a traditional way, but we took the school exams also as a basic for the diploma. And there was an exam and a testing in the end, but this was mainly virtual and in some places some physical testing. So this was first important to know also for the children how their future will look. The reopening, we decided pretty soon at the 1st of June to start reopening in primary education and the 8th of June to start in secondary education. We think reopening in primary was possible because the scientific proof shows that children up till 12 years, the risk of contamination of spreading the COVID is 0 point something. It's very, very small. So the safety of the children itself is not so much in jeopardy. For the teachers, we are very cautious because when we opened, we agreed that the distance of 1.5 meters should be kept also between the teacher and the children, but especially between the teachers amongst each other. But in primary education, we opened under conditions. I will tell some more about the protocols later. And in secondary education, we opened 1 week after that with a more strict regulation to the 1.5 meter. We first, however, decided that only 50% of the educational time would be in the school and the other 50% would be at home. So we started in a way of blended education, and we already agreed that this was a very good period both for the children and the teachers not to start from one day to the next fully, because it gave us the opportunity first to work with the protocols in the school, meaning the protocols of how to enter, how to keep distance, how to behave with parents, how to behave with each other. And the children were used already to the distant education by internet. So this combination was very good to transit to the next stage where we had the reopening of the primary schools already in the end of June. And secondary will start fully after the summer holiday.
Okay, that's good. I think it was really excellent the way you started with a blended option to kind of ease everyone in to opening. And you found that that was a good way to begin. Is that something you would, kind of recommend, to start with a blended option rather than all physical opening for those who choose to send their children?
Yeah, we had, however, some questions and problems. In the special education, it is almost impossible not to touch your children.
Yes.
So this had a special protocol also concerning the use of masks and gloves, or not to use them. So we have special attention for special education, including the transport to the schools, because how you secure the safety in the transport for the chauffeur in the public transport. So this was a big question for us. And also here it helped to have first smaller groups of kids so you can do the experience with it. Then there was, during the lockdown, the schools did not close because this is not the correct word. The schools were open for the children of parents with vital professions.
Oh.
But the education did not close.
Right.
Right.
And we did already during the lockdown experience how to deal with children and how to deal in daycare with children of this group. And also we allowed children in vulnerable groups to enter the school, meaning from a special background or with a special educational needs. So this was the first thing, that we had some experience with these groups of children. And it was very important that we made protocols for all different kind of schools, because the protocol for special education is different from the protocol from primary, is different from the protocol from secondary education, because the context of the school and the daycare is different. The basic, of course, for everybody is a little bit more or less the same, but it was very helpful for the schools to know exactly for their kind of school what is the basic protocol. We had special attention, for example, for not using our gymnastic rooms as a classroom, because especially education like gymnastics, cultural expression, in this time of COVID is very important for children. So where our first focus could go to the math and the literacy, the numeracy and this kind of education, we very soon found out for the children that it's very important, especially the other part of education, because also they have been in traumatic situations. And then to have cultural expression, to have music, to have gymnastic, to go out, to play together, is a very important aspect of education that we should not forget in reopening the schools. And also during the distant education, we did not only do a hangout with the total group, but we also provided there that children can work in smaller groups together, physical or digital, because the meeting of children is different from the meeting of adults.
You mentioned some of the strategies you use that we use too with Google Hangouts and other to provide instruction remotely during your period of the past several months before reopening, right? What do you think is one primary area with your own remote learning that you would like to see honed or improved going forward? Like, what did you learn collectively about remote learning, even though you started from a good, skillful place with good resources?
Yeah.
How would you like to see that grow? How can
there
that
are a few
improve?
things I would like to point out first, and
Yes.
then I come to this ICT part. What we found is that the crucial role of leadership emerged very quickly. It was always the school head who is the binding factor, because first you have to bind your team, which is in panic. Well, you know, if you have 60 teammates and you have to call all of them for 5 minutes, it's quite a job.
Oh, yeah.
And then there is the education that you have to form together and do with ICT. So the school heads were very crucial in organizing their teams and work together on also these new ways of education and to exchange the knowledge and to make a plan how to do this distant education. The secondary is, and then I also come to the ICT, there were still a lot of children which did not have devices. And this was very interesting because for years we are trying to get the digitalization of the Netherlands complete and to have every child on a device. And there was never really the money or the possibility to do it. And now suddenly the government, the corporate businesses, everybody put the shoulders together, and within a few weeks, every child had a device, and suddenly we had the money, we had the opportunity and the possibility. If there was not a Wi-Fi at home, the connection was done. So what we have learned is if you really put this child at the center, and now because of the urgency, suddenly it was possible. And I ask myself the question, what kept us for the past few years of realizing this when now it showed that it was possible within 1 month to connect everybody? So this is a very big learning point. If you really put the pupil at the center, what can we reach? So
Absolutely.
This is a question of for the policymakers too, that if we really think something is important, we can do it. So this was the first. Secondary is about the culture of learning in the schools, what I mentioned. A lot of teachers, of course, we all do some ICT and we all have our phones and our devices. But in some classrooms, there is not a lot of integration, real integration of using ICT. And now also because we put the child at the center and we had no choice, a lot of teachers suddenly were able to learn very fast the things they refused to learn for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the second thing about what makes that we can open up people for learning in this new time where the development is going so fast. Is it the urgency? Was it the challenge? So what made, it's maybe needs some more research, but what was exactly that made the teachers suddenly able to learn in 1 week that they didn't learn also in a long period of time? And the same was, of course, because the parents had the same experience at home, the children had the same experience. Something, actually, I think of it, maybe this crisis is for education in a way a blessing, that we had an experimental garden for a few weeks, which never could have emerged in any other situation than a crisis like this. And for the impulses on education, I think we've learned a lot and yeah, really taken in a lot. But most of all, we found that the personal contact, especially for the younger children, to see the teachers for real, it was so important, and everybody missed each other crazy. And the social cohesion of the pupils together, it can never be replaced by ICT. So this is also something, no matter how much we do the technologization of our education, meeting for young people is crucial.
And there is distancing between students and teachers, teachers and students. Can we just, I may have missed what you said about masks. Are teachers and or students required to wear masks?
Where?
Masks.
No.
No, no masks. Okay.
No.
Because I don't think we had touched upon that, because that's not a feature.
We did not, no. And that is still in whole the society of the Netherlands. Also now,
yes,
we are not obligated to wear masks only after the opening of the lockdown in the society. We do it in public transport. We think distance of 1.5 meters is more important, to have distance, to have good cleaning, to have ventilation. And now there is a discussion on the masks, because in a lot of countries the masks are obligated, but so far it is not obligated masks. But we do leave, and this is also what I ask for from the school leaders, look in the context of your school. And if you have a teacher working with the younger ones who cry or who snot or who vomit or who have to go in toilet, and you have to touch the children and you feel not certain, it is not forbidden to use the mask and the gloves. So please provide if somebody needs it.
Okay.
But it was not obligated. And I forgot to mention one thing. We have strict regulation about if you are a teacher or an adult person in a risk group because of your physical state or your age, or we have some regulations about this, you stay at home, you do not come in the school, but you can be a part of distant education. If you are having any small complaints, you need to be tested, and you stay at home until you are tested. So one of the biggest challenges of the schools, we did already have a shortage of teachers and a shortage of head teachers. But now in many schools, there is a percentage of teachers which is structurally staying at home because they are in the risk group, or one of the family members is in the risk group, or they are at home for several days because they have to wait for the test results. And this makes it sometimes very difficult to organize the physical education. And then it's also very important that you can catch back on the distant education, because sometimes we cannot receive children in the school because there are not enough teachers.
Thank you. Did the great majority of parents agree to send students back to school?
Yes.
Did you? Okay. So
there
that
was
really
a group of parents. No, there was really a group of parents who did not agree. And until the 1st of September, also our Ofsted, the inspection, they did leave everything free. There is no obligation for educational time, for physical time, and parents can decide to keep their children at home. But from the 1st of September, it is no longer allowed, because then the schools are formally open. Of course, if you are in this risk situation, or your family or your child, that's okay, yeah? But you cannot choose out of fear to keep your children at home. In the situation where the parents are well educated, where are more than one devices in the home, the children get a lot of support, and for them it's easy to learn and to develop. And especially in the situation where the parents cannot support the children because of the language or because they are not very high educated themselves. And maybe there's one device in the house and there are parents who have to work and 3 children who have to use the same device. We see, of course, a lot of difference in the chances that this gives the children. So also if you incubate this and you think ahead of the future, this will be the questions that we have to answer. And that also comes back to the devices. Are we able to give every child access, digital access to everything they need? And then if there are parents who can support the children, because we have seen wonderful situations where the parents have the schedule with the children, they sit at home, they help each other. But there have been absolute terror situations as well, where there was no support and no opportunity. We have seen a lot behind the back door of the houses, which has given a lot of information. But also, and especially the parents who were able to help their children, we have regained a lot of respect for our profession to know what the teacher actually does with the children.
Yeah.
But all the worries are not over, although we also recognize that before this situation, it was also the home situation the same. So if the parents were not able to help now, they have not been able to help before. So we also touch the more structural problem, but because we were in the living rooms, it has become more visible, and it will help us because it was so prominently visible. It will help us that we want to do something.
So here too, it's become very, very clear that equity issues that have always existed in schools have been, another kind of new word, daylighted by the experience around COVID. So now there is no questioning, much less ignoring the equity issues that have been brought to the surface in terms of learning opportunities for students.
I would say that first principle, take care of your own well-being, because if the principal is no longer in the school, the problems are huge. And second is take the well-being of your people very serious, because if somebody is afraid, of course, formally you have to get to work. But if you have fear, it is very important to have attention for this. On the other hand, we experience if with your team you can have this positive flow for the children, for each other, for your school. We have a very high group which is normally coming to school, who's not feeling afraid, who is not feeling in danger. There the protocols are very important, that people know what the regulations are and how to keep them safe. So inform the parents, make the plans together, take care that also I'm not sure how it is with you, but with us the teachers have votings in this kind of thing of how you do the protocol and how you want to work. Give people really the feeling that they are also the owner of the protocol in the school, how you do it, so they can feel safe. And if something emerges where they not feel safe, that they really feel free and equipped that you can do something about it. So the school leaders are very important in doing this for the team. And also here, the leadership is very important in how you inspire also your parents, also your teachers, how you connect in society with the preschool, with the daycare. So this leadership network is very important. And I would suggest to the superintendency, to the boards, give your school heads also some space to talk together in how they do things, because we see that this learning network from head teacher to head teacher, and also for them to be able to express to each other how it was in the schools and what they experienced, that is very important, because a healthy and happy school head is a very high factor in the quality of education and getting this process started.
In my full name, I'm Paul Byrne, and I work for an organization called NAPD, which is the National Association of Principals and Deputy Principals in Ireland. Now, we are unusual in that we represent all of the post-primary school leaders, principals and deputy principals. In Ireland, you have 3 different sectors in post-primary education. You have the education training boards, you have the voluntary secondary schools, which would really have a religious ethos at the background. It would have come from the religious orders. And then you have community and comprehensive schools, which are basically a combination or an amalgamation of the voluntary secondary schools and the education training boards. Now there's 735 secondary schools or post-primary schools in Ireland. The state exams normally run in June for a 3-week period. And the examination results, they normally come out about the middle of August, about the 15th of August, and the students then get their placement in third level. This year is slightly different because we've gone with the calculated grades model, where the teachers assessed the students on an overall performance over the time that they had at senior cycle and gave an estimated or a calculated grade. That has gone forward, but there's a lot of standardization then to be done by the State Examinations Commission and the Department of Education.
Paul, when you were talking about the calculated grading, I think I understand something similar in terms of what I think most of our schools did. Is that something that, I guess the answer depends upon how you're going to reopen, do you anticipate using that same system? Because 2021 is probably going to be a very unique year. Even if we can do all of the instruction, we're going to have lots of added things to do in addition and may have not as much time for all of the content.
Yeah, we brought up that issue with the department in that because not all of the kids were able to engage during the school closure, that we needed to level the playing field, if you like. So rather than them reducing content, they have decided that the National Council for Curriculum Assessment, that they will give a broader range of questions in the examinations. Because not all schools cover content in the same order. You get someone teaching chemistry, they may start with one, they could start at the back of the book. Whatever they find suits best the learning of the students that they have in front of them. So the feeling in the department and within the State Examinations Commission is that this is probably the fairest way of dealing with the, I suppose, the lack of content connection that was had over the last while.
And your state agency feels that they would be able to develop a new test and get it standardized within the 2021 year to be able to do that in, I think you said the last 3 weeks in June or for 3 weeks in June?
They should have it ready. Like they have, nearly 7-8 months to do it.
I got you.
No, they're fairly confident. One of the things we always pride ourselves on is our State Examinations Commission are extremely efficient and they have very few mishaps, if you like, when running state examinations.
Wow.
Now, everybody has great confidence in them because of their level of fairness. It doesn't matter if you're doing your examination in a disadvantaged school or in an advantaged school. It's only a number that's on a sheet when the examiner is correcting it, and the school isn't identified either. So it doesn't matter what your background is, it's what you actually produce. And they're trying to, the reason that they're, I suppose, being extremely cautious with the calculated grades is they want to maintain the high standards which they have had for so many years. They also want to make sure that the leaving cert is what we call it, the qualification which the students are being awarded has the same standing and standard as previous examinations. So it won't be looked back in 5 years' time when they're looking for employment, or you did your final exams on the time. This will make sure that it's that they can stand over it and that we can stand over it and that the colleges can stand over it.
Excellent points. Thank you, Paul.
The issue of immunocompromised teachers and students has come up quite a bit during the summer. And we looked at different ways of being able to get teachers who are immunocompromised to still be able to teach. But what we found is that the bandwidth in a lot of the schools and in the areas doesn't really allow for live streaming for multiple devices. Now, in the school that I'm in here, we have 240 meg broadband. But we know if we try to live stream out of 10, 12 classrooms, that it wouldn't work. Our big thing is that we have to have excellent communication with the teachers, because the way to alleviate fear is according as you have measures in place which are going to assure safety, that according as each is done, that you communicate it to the teachers. And each thing that you put in place for their protection and for the students' protection alleviates the fear of coming back. Now, saying that, we do realize that there will be some teachers, some students, some parents who will have lost loved ones and may have a heightened level of fear. And at the end of the day, if some parents choose not to send the students back, we have to find some way to accommodate their learning as well, because it's understandable that there will be fear. Part of what we have been doing during the summer is looking at how are we going to cater for well-being? How are we going to cater for the well-being of the teachers? And the department have brought a new body on board. They're, I can't think of the name of them at the moment, but they're an employee assistance service, so that you will have a helpline that if you're experiencing difficulty, anxiety, whatever, you will be able to ring and you'll be able to get support. They will also be putting together some videos, I suppose, and CPD online to help ease people back into the school. We've also looked for instruction videos to be put together on COVID that teachers will engage with before they return to school. Now, we changed our child protection guidelines about 2 years ago. And one of the things for each teacher coming back, they had to complete this module and they had to bring the certificate into the principal to say that it was completed. So you do your CPD, you have 10 questions at the end. It's not a case of turning it on, walking away and coming back. You had to actually sit through it to be able to answer the questions. And it would have been brought in by Minister Catherine Zappone. I think she's American originally. But she made sure that it was done and that it was correct. And we're hoping that we'll have a similar system, that each teacher coming back and hopefully each student coming back will have done an online piece of training, which will show them how to best protect themselves from the virus and protect others from being affected, and what to do if they notice they have symptoms. We've also looked for the department to give clear guidelines, kind of like we used to call them in the army, standard operation procedures. If you know that somebody has a symptom, what do you do? Everybody in school knows they go to a safe area. The people that are dealing with them will mask up, will put on the hazcam, whatever they need, and then we get the person out of the school immediately.
You mentioned that people are going to trust the measures that are in place. Can you just click down what some of those measures will be? Will teachers be required to wear masks? Is there a 6-foot distancing piece? What are some of the primary measures that will be in place?
And what happens if if that isn't followed?
What we think they're going to be looking at is 1 meter social distancing, which would be 3-foot social distancing for the students, with a 2-foot social distancing to the teachers. Now that's going to involve taking out any surplus furniture out of the classroom. It may mean that some of our classes, we would have up to 30 in some classes. If that's the case, we will have to probably split those classes into two 15s, or else we'll have to reconfigure how we're placing the students in classrooms. We'd have some classrooms which would be 49 square meters. You might have 2 or 3 which are 50 square meters, which could hold 30 with the right social distancing. So there's a huge logistical exercise in getting the school ready. So you're going to match the size of the class with the size of the classroom. We are introducing one-way systems. So the corridors have clear delineation on the ground. Where we have canteens, we have floor markings in place. We will have a sign-in booklet. We will be, for the students, the contact tracing can be done within class groupings. So insofar as possible, we will keep the students within their core groups. We will not have them moving from room to room like we had in the past. The teachers will move. But by the nature of the optional subjects in secondary level, it will necessitate that some of the students will have to move to practical rooms, to metalwork rooms, to art rooms and that, for to avail of those subjects for PE. Insofar as possible, we're going to try and run a normal curriculum, a normal timetable. There will be national guidelines. Now, when it comes to policy, the policies will be developed centrally, but applied locally.
Thank you.
So you'll get a template COVID-19 response plan, but you'll put in your school name, you'll put in your context. Now, we would also have special schools. Now, not so many as we used to have, but the special schools will cater for primary and post-primary, for kids who we can't fully cater for within our standard school system. And in that case, PPE will be worn by the teachers. Whereas hopefully in the run-of-the-mill school or ordinary school, they won't be required to wear PPE. It'll be optional.
Thank you.
Well, and you said that social distancing would be 3 feet for children, maybe?
Yeah, that's what we're hoping is going to be in the guidelines when it comes out.
Right.
Because at 2 meters, at 6 feet, we would probably only fit 8 students into a room. Then we would be looking at the idea of a blended model of learning where you'd have to leave half the school at home every second week. We looked at the feasibility of that and it wouldn't work.
Do you I don't know how to word this. How much of a choice will parents have? You mentioned that parents will have their choice if they are feeling vulnerable about sending children, but that's only possible if you kind of do a blended online in person. Will parents have to send their children to school if you have even part of the day in person, or can they opt for all remote?
At primary level, you have the right to homeschool your child. So if you want to take, you can keep the kids at home, you can teach them yourselves. That is your option. Then it would
be considered homeschooling.
Yeah, that's in the Constitution that can happen. At secondary school level, the expectation is that you will send the kids to school. Now, your question is, if a student has to stay at home, some kids may have an underlying condition, severe asthma, recovering from cancer. What we will do is the schools will get the content that's needed for the student sent home to them, either online or sometimes what happened in the past where students didn't have internet access. The teachers will give the teaching notes, the homework. The parents will come in and collect it. That's one of the options. But there's also what we call a home tuition system, where a parent can apply for home tuition for a student. Now, the issue with secondary education or post-primary is the variety in subjects. So, excuse me, it'll be blended. Some of it will be delivered online, and some of it can be done by home tuition. Our problem is going to be the number of teachers that we require. We have a lot of Irish teachers who are in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, UAE, Scotland, England, Canada, Australia, America. And that leaves us with a shortage. And before COVID, we were having an issue with finding substitutes. What did happen this summer, quite a lot of them from the Middle East came home. And we're hoping to try and keep them here.
Well, just a follow-up question. Will you be doing temperature checks and health screenings at the school? Or is there any mandate nationally to do COVID testing? Is that working?
Well, firstly, you're going to have to sign a declaration form 3 days before you return to school to say that you are symptom free. And it's minimum of 3 days before the return. While the protocol on return to work, which covers industry, covers right across the country, does suggest temperature checks, it's not envisaged that temperature checks will be done in schools. Now, we have seen products whereby when you sign in the morning, it's kind of facial recognition thing, which will automatically take temperatures. Again, that's where we're waiting for the clear guidance, which is going to come out today. But my inkling would be that it won't be temperature checks. The other thing that we feel that there's probably going to be a need to do is to identify teachers who have are in what we call the very high risk category. Someone who has had a kidney transplant, liver transplant, undergone chemotherapy, that they won't be able to come back. So we need to be putting substitutes in for them. Within the next 4 weeks, we need to recruit those people. So there's a huge amount of work, as you know yourself, to be done. But if the preparation is right, the implementation will happen smoothly.
Could you circle back and talk about the grid that you mentioned earlier when you and I were just on? What was that?
Oh, the spidergram. I'm going to send that to you.
Okay.
What we did, we took a spreadsheet and we divided it into 3 sections: policy and guidance, practical implementation, and curriculum. And we looked at what were the issues for school leaders under each of those headings. So we listed those out. We took the information that had come back from our regional meetings and the queries, and we posed a set of questions under each heading, whether it be hygiene, whether it be hand sanitization, whether it, all to do with the reopening of school. And then according as we could detect that resources were being developed and being put out there, we replaced the questions with answers. And at the end, we pulled the whole lot together, and it's on our website. And we did basically resource repository for reopening schools, and included in that was a checklist on what needed to be done. Now that helped a lot of our schools get a head start before the guidance is coming out. Like if you have a building closed for 6 months, your water system is quite possibly susceptible to Legionnaire's disease. So you need to get all of your header tanks flushed out, all of your pipework flushed out by a plumber. So the guidance for that came from Irish Water, not from the department. So rather than reinventing the wheel, we took the guidance, which was coming out for hotels, and we shared that with the schools. So that's one thing that will be on a checklist that has to be done. So it meant that 6 weeks ago, you could book your plumber for 2 weeks before the school reopens. Because finding plumbers here, it's like trying to find a leprechaun at times. You just can't get them.
Thanks. That sounds very smart.
I'll share that with you.
Okay.
And we went through a couple of different sheets on that. As we found, say, websites, we put the resources together, and then we got it professionally put up on our website, which isn't in a spreadsheet, but it is an active repository of resources. Look, it was lovely to see you online.
You too.
And stay safe and stay well.
Thank
and the best of luck with reopening.